welcome to The Wardroom, a podcast dedicated to the leadership development of the U.S. Navy's engineering duty officers. I'm your host, Lieutenant Commander Matthew Horton. Today we'll be featuring a panel on women in leadership. We are joined by three leaders from our community. Rear Admiral Seiko Okano is a native of Evanston, Illinois, and has served in a variety of assignments across the C4I Missile Defense and Combat Systems Enterprises. And she continues the tradition of program executives for integrated warfare systems appearing here on the podcast. We're also joined by Lieutenant Commanders Christina Carino and Rebecca Macus. Lieutenant Commander Carino is a native of Ringtown, Pennsylvania, and is currently serving as an action officer for the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy Ships. Lieutenant Commander Macus is a self-identified East Coast military brat and is currently serving as the Test and Trials Director for the Amphibious Warfare Program Office. And all three of our distinguished guests are graduates of the U.S. Naval Academy, so as the only non-Academy grad here, I'm feeling a little outnumbered today, but we invite all of you to grab a cup of coffee and join us in the wardroom. So, Admiral, Christina, Rebecca, welcome to the wardroom.
It's fantastic being here. So thanks for doing this, Matt.
So who inspired your leadership style and why? Why did you pick those people?
The best example I can give you is my mother. She retired as a colonel in the Air Force, so I lived with a military leader, got to see her challenges. She would come home from tough days. She was doing maintenance, logistics, supply, all that type of stuff. How did she deal with the difficult people in her squadrons? How did she deal with the difficulties that, the military was facing as they were going through Desert Storm and the start of, enduring freedom, all that type of stuff. So she's been my greatest example. As far as Navy leaders, the shining example that I have is my first ship's captain, Captain Chuck Johnson. He embodied servant leadership. He was the type of guy that never raised his voice. You just never wanted to disappoint him. And I have aspired to be like him, as a leader, just because the humility and grace that he just exemplified is just inspiring.
Honestly, I'm still developing my leadership style, but throughout my life, I think that there are a lot of different people that have inspired that from the time that I was young. Prior to the Navy, I looked at people like Pat Summitt and even Michael Jordan, people who were successful and motivated others in pursuit of hard things. And then in high school, I actually got really interested in General MacArthur and the way that he led, and was just fascinated by the things that he accomplished and how he went about doing them, even through the trials and tribulations that he endured. I mean, once I got to the EDO community, it really opened up. There's no shortage of inspiration as far as leadership. People that pull others up and want them to succeed, leaders who listen, leaders who aren't afraid to do different things and want to hear from people. It would be an injustice if I mentioned one person. I don't think that would be fair. There have been a lot. And I think that everyone that you serve under in your chain of command, either directly or indirectly, I try and take something away from everyone. And I had a mentor that told me to have a book and keep track. Whenever you learn something, write it down, whether it's good or bad, keep that lessons learned. And so I think that has kind of been the build up so far of what's inspired my leadership style. And I will also tell you that I've had a lot of peers and even a lot of mentees and JOs under me that I've looked at and who have really have driven that as well and who've inspired me.
First of all, that was a great answer, Christina. Just the 360 degree, learning from folks. I will tell you that, and I know Sarah Rice, she's on here, but she really, I would say, inspired me in how she tackled the women EDOs, just in general, when she was just a lieutenant. I was a commander. And, I feel like this is like a Gen X issue, but, I had my head down and I was like working hard and, just trying to survive, in my opinion. Really didn't think about how I was mentoring other women in the community at all. I mean, I honestly was just like, I just need to do the job. And here comes this lieutenant, and she kind of in her own way sat me down, and she's like, we kind of need your leadership. We kind of need you to step up a little bit because we don't have anybody else. Really struck a chord within me that I was learning, and she was managing up, which is, I think, something that we don't get empowered enough to do. And sometimes we don't thank the people who do that. And so I just want to publicly thank Sarah for doing that for me. And in the future, I mean, leaders need to be mentored too. And a lot of that comes from the folks that they mentor, but it is 360 degrees. So I would say shout out to Sarah Rice, but then also, Admiral Page is another person that I think really took me under her wing and taught me some mad leadership skills as well.
Yes, ma'am. Well, let me build on that a little bit then. So you kind of mentioned, managing up as a challenge, but are there some other unique challenges that you think are faced by women in leadership?
Yeah, this is going to be a little intense, so hang on for a second. I've had some years to think about this. I think we haven't done enough collectively to change the culture for really true inclusion of women, not just in the EDO community, but at large. I think if you look at just the general numbers, opportunities for women have increased, tremendously over the last 50 years. But when you look at the data over the last 10 years, progress has really kind of stalled out. And even in the EDO data, as I've had the folks look at, just have kind of stalled out, right? We're underrepresented in leadership positions. When I was a captain, I think there was only 3% female captains, and I know we were recruiting about 25 to 30% of the lieutenants were females. So it was a disproportionate number of the women in our community versus the women in leadership positions. And what that does is limits access to leadership. And I know, we do a better job in the EDO community in mentoring, but certainly there are pockets where that access is limited. So, even if you look outside of the EDO community, you just look again at large, the tech sector, women are leaving companies in the tech sector 45% higher than men. And the number one, I don't know if anyone wants to guess this, what's the number one reason why women are leaving the tech sector in general? It's culture. Culture is the number one reason. It's not family reasons. It's not any of these other things. It's that the culture just wasn't conducive to them. And if you look at, how we kind of work through this, one of the things that I think women in the military have done well, but maybe to our detriment, is that we change our own behavior to adapt to the environment. And I've done this myself to the women, at this on this podcast. Hey, sit at the table, lean in, be more aggressive, do all these things, which are particularly, male traits, but we've managed to absorb them and change how we are in order to adapt to the culture around us. But I think it's not necessarily our problem or just our problem. That in fact, I think all of us collectively need to do a better job in changing the culture in general. There's some people that are saying, that might say, hey, well, does the culture really need to change? Maybe men are better in math, or, in whatever. But when you look at, again, the statistics, I think in 2019 or 2020, there were more women with bachelor's degrees than men in the workplace. I think I looked it up, there's 40% of U.S. businesses are women owned, are bringing in over $1.7 trillion in sales. So it's not that we're not educated. It's not that we're not skilled or have the business acumen. And I know they're not changing their own behavior, right? I think it is really this inability to really try and look at our own unconscious biases and, from the start, develop in anti-bias culture by design, by just the design of the community. And we haven't gotten there yet, and I know this is a big leap, but I'd welcome everybody else's thoughts on that. So I know pretty weighty, but I would say that's our biggest challenge.
I love this question, and I think Admiral did a great job of explaining some of the data behind what's going on, just to say that, it really does exist and it's out there. I'm going to take it from a little bit of a different perspective. The three of us are here. We have different backgrounds, and we've had different different situations. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to address it. And I was talking to someone and they said to me, if you're not honest and if you're not candid, then there's no progress. And I thought that that was really important. So I just want to share a little bit of when I realized that there was bias. And because I think I was naive for a long time, especially earlier in my career. But I will say that I came into the EDO community. I went to NPS, and that's when I had my first son. And so I think maybe the ignorance is a challenge in itself of the fact that bias exists, any kind of bias, gender bias, whatever it may be. I think maybe that's a challenge. But interestingly, when I had my son, that's when I started getting questions and comments about how and if I could do a certain job. So I'm just going to give the moment where I realized that the bias existed, because I think it's important to kind of recognize that. And we have hopefully moved on from it, but it kind of impacted me and how I move forward. And it probably drove me, honestly, to even dig in a little harder. But I was a young EDO at that time. So this is years ago, and I was mentoring with a long retired officer now. And this person was looking at my EDO planner and paused for a minute and looked at me and said, I can't think of a female officer with kids who's made it in DC. And I had DC in my career planner way back then, not even looking at Canon Cocker community at the time. But it made me wonder, what the heck did being a female have to do with my success in DC? I couldn't understand where that came from. And ironically, it's also because of strong, now retired male leadership that I and many other women are here in DC and are successful. So maybe unconscious bias, Admiral mentioned that. I think it's important that we all are very self-aware and understand that and its impacts. So I just wanted to briefly kind of mention that.
That is such a powerful story, Christina. I appreciate you sharing that with everybody. But, unfortunately, Christina is not the only one, and there's been feedback across the community about the mentoring that we get. And, to that point, the questions such as, and so how old are your kids? Where are they? And how are you going to manage that? And, questions that maybe typically wouldn't be asked of a man. So, again, unconscious bias that, on the surface isn't malicious, but certainly can be harmful later on.
Absolutely. That's actually a good segue for us. And Christina and Rebecca, I'll open up the floor to you. How do you think are some ways that leaders can overcome gender bias in the Navy?
I would say when you have the opportunity and you're in a position to step up and take those leadership roles and just own it. Don't give anybody the opportunity to insert any kind of questions or make those assumptions about you. And also be very honest, open and honest about what you're doing. Just perform. If you're in a leadership position and if you perform, then there's no reason for anything else to follow behind that other than a female can be successful in this role.
Would you say sometimes, Christina, just to add on to that, would you say sometimes though, if you are at a table and it's all men, and you do bring up something that is exactly right? You bring up the piece of data that is the crucial piece, but nobody hears you. What do you do in that situation? I mean, because the person's performing, but they're not being heard.
Yeah, I mean, I think consistency is a part of it. And again, if you're in a position where you are truly at the center, at the front of the table, like I said, inserting yourself in those positions where it's kind of undeniable where it's coming from. Also, I think personally, I believe, getting people, it takes time, getting people to believe in you and be comfortable with you and follow you. I think that if enough women do that, whether it's in the private or public sector, just having people see that will eventually get there.
Yeah, so to kind of piggyback on what Christina was saying about, being in the forefront, I was a PMR down on the Gulf Coast. I was the only woman in the room. I was also the youngest person in the room, and thrust into a leadership position where initially I had some people trying to do some mansplaining, and I shut that down pretty quickly. And the trick is, how do you balance being yourself, being authentic to who you are? If you're not wired to be a lean in, aggressive kind of person, finding a leadership style that still gets you heard. With how I was raised, my parents knew from the very early age of like 6 months that I was going to be assertive, and they fostered that in me. But if that's not how you're wired, finding out, what type of style, works for you. And sometimes it is being the quiet voice in the room, so that, people have to listen to make sure that you're heard. And then also fostering a culture of respect. One of the challenges that I faced as a PMR was there was the favorite punching bag. One of the guys was just always picked on, and very quickly I realized, look, I can't tolerate this. We're going to foster a culture of respect within this office. So even if it's not something that is female centric, just making sure that every single person is treated with dignity and respect that all humans deserve is a great foundation for fostering a culture of inclusiveness within the workplace, so that we can bring more women into positions of leadership, whether it's advertently or as a side effect.
I mean, I want to get an amen to that. That is absolutely, and again, that is changing the culture from the beginning. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
So let me go back a little bit. One of the things I think I heard multiple times here was, how do you balance out your own personality and your own kind of personal tendencies towards leadership with maybe some of the other traits that may or may not be expected from persons in leadership. So, what are some traits that you think good leaders possess, and how can you cultivate those?
I have traits, that some that tie into this whole, just being a good leader in general, which is, I think, just being authentic to your true leadership self. So, as Rebecca was saying, look, her personality was one way growing up, and Christina, her personality comes through in her leadership. For me, I feel like I was a poser early on in kind of my leadership, only because I wanted to fit in so badly. So I mimicked the male leaders around me, because those are really the only leaders I knew. It took a while for me to kind of wrestle with the fact that I'm, that's not really who I am. And I feel uncomfortable. And it triggered from the fact that I just felt uncomfortable. And people could see that uncomfortableness. And, I was like, well, the reason why I'm uncomfortable is because I don't really lead like this. This is not really my natural tendency. So I think if there's something I would leave with folks is, it's okay to be your authentic self. And it is absolutely okay to lead differently than your bosses. And I think it's just owning it and growing into that, and then making those skills stronger.
So one of the key traits that I found in leaders that I see as very successful, I would consider very successful, is empathy. It's not lead as your authentic self, but understand that the people that you are leading don't necessarily react the same way. They might have different priorities. You might not really be able to relate to them whatsoever, but as long as you have empathy and you try and put yourselves in their shoes, just to understand where they're coming from. And I think that the ED community is pretty good about understanding that and recognizing it. I think some of it's defensive. We've got a bunch of nerds in leadership roles, and they just assume that we need a little bit of help figuring out the whole interpersonal thing. So we're doing the Myers-Briggs. That was a big thing for a bit. And now we're starting to get into the emergenetics, which my program office went through, and that was really great. It was really interesting for me to take a look at that and say, okay, I'm these are my personality traits, and I don't really understand too much over here. I have other people working for me or that I'm working with who, they really are the social animals, and they're looking at how does this benefit the group? Whereas I'm focused more on the visionary side of things, or being able to take yourself out of your own position and put yourself in somebody else's shoes to become an empathetic leader so that you understand the motivation behind why people are doing certain things is, I think, one of the most important things that we can do.
Yeah, I think Rebecca hit it on the head. I was going to call what she was talking about awareness, awareness of where people come from and what may motivate their thought process and how they do things. And it's not just that, it's processes, how culture is changing. What's the newest, fastest thing that people are using, and how are they using it? And I think that's important. I think the ability to shift a culture is important. I think that's an ability that it's rare, it takes time, but a culture where failing is okay as long as it leads to learning. And then Admiral Okano is good at this, as she just proved, openness, sharing how you got to success and where you struggled along the way. I think that's really important as well. And so that's what I would add to that conversation.
Hey, I'm going to add one more thing, Matt, onto what Christina and Rebecca said. And I do think humility is a really good trait, and not identifying too closely with your own ideas so that you take offense to when they get challenged, but really being open. And I think it dovetails into empathy and awareness, and just being able to ingest new ideas and not really be so close to the ones that you think you're right all the time. I think there's a definite challenge where we tend to overvalue expertise, especially in our community. And this is the whole 10,000 hour rule versus the 3 rule, right? We've been trained that you've got to be the smartest person in the room, and you got to know all the answers. And the thing about that is that that works if your environment doesn't change around you. That works if the game doesn't change. Like, you're good at football or you're good at tennis or something, and those rules don't change. The problem with the environment we're in, and Christina hit on it, is that the world is changing so fast around us, especially in IWS, that the data, doubles on itself every 3 years. So even medical doctors, I mean, you look at them, and now there's like a specialist, you're like a right ear specialist, doctor, because that information is growing so much that they can't even ingest it, right, to be like, an overall expert. So, the fact that we kind of hold folks and to this really high standard of being like the smartest person in the room, I think is kind of a faulty way to look at it, and having some humility to say, I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I certainly can get you the smartest person, on this area, I can certainly get you that person. So that, I think we've got to work on that.
So let me ask this then to the group. Is there any other strategies then that you'd offer to women or to men to achieve success in our community?
Embrace diversity and inclusion. I mean, honestly, if you start there and you truly fundamentally believe, again, going back to what I initially said about, I might not be the smartest person in the room, but I know who the smartest person is in this area. That only works if your network is huge, right? But your network can't be big if you are you have the same 5 people that you constantly just go to. This is about trying to make sure that we are exponentially growing those networks, and the only way you can do that is really embracing diversity, which starts with race and gender and all that other stuff, but really is about at the end of the day, your skill set and your networks. And if you can get to that, I really think you're unlocking faster problem solving.
So I'm just going to kind of piggyback on what Admiral Okano said when we're talking about the diversity. I think that, and it's really just to emphasize a strength that we have within the EDO community with the military leadership that we bring into the different program offices and other commands. I've done 2 soup ship tours so far, and when you start talking soup ships, they are very tightly knit groups of people where people get hired in, they work their way up through the ranks, and that there's the soup ship way of doing things. And it is a good thing for us to be sending junior officers, commanders, captains with a diverse experience to these type of commands, where you can basically shake things up and bring that diversity of thought. So it's really just incumbent upon us to continue to encourage that diversity of thought, to push people outside their comfort zones, and to say, hey, just because this is the way we've always done it doesn't mean it's the right way. Let's look outside our lifelines and find a new way to do this that's more efficient, more effective, brings in more people so that we can ultimately be a better asset to the warfighter.
Hey, actually, that's a pretty good segue, Rebecca. So let me kind of ask a kind of a follow-up to that. What leadership advice would you have given yourself as midshipman Macus, all those years ago back at the Naval Academy? Anything special?
Oh my goodness, yes. So my first bit of advice to midshipman Islin was my maiden name, is you don't have to be one of the boys. I was on the offshore sailing team, so I was one of 3 women on a team of 50, and I felt that to succeed, I needed to act just like the guys, and that did not work. I look back at my academy experience, and I am so grateful that I went there. I am so proud of my accomplishments. But hindsight's 2020, and I could have done so much better if I had been, once again, authentic to who I am and what my values are, and not trying to blend in and be one of the guys. Maybe if I'd been not more feminine, but just unapologetically female, instead of just giving into the sailing team culture, into that brigade culture, I could have helped pave a way for change on the team. Qualifying EDO advice. Did we want to touch on that?
Absolutely.
So that touches, comes back to that civilian leadership. When you go from, I did grad school before I went to my qualifying ED tour, or before I went to my surface tours. So I went straight from military leadership into civilian leadership, and that was just night and day difference. And didn't quite understand it at first. The motivation that you're using with the civilian workforce is very different than what you're going to be applying to your division, your department. So, and one of the things that I rapidly learned is that in many cases, especially when you are a qualifying EDO who has no clue what you're doing, but you come from a position where you are making decisions out in the fleet, and you feel like you have to make decisions. When you're sitting in on those 0600 production meetings and stuff like that, is the shipbuilders, the government civilians look at you and they're just like, sure. And they're thinking in their head, you are temporary. I have been doing this for 15 years, 20 years, however many years. I don't like you, and I'm just going to wait you out, which is kind of an unfortunate mentality, but it's something that we have to combat. It's a matter of figuring out what that motivation is, tapping into that, and once again, pushing that culture change instead of trying to, fight it head on, swimming upstream, or trying to subsume yourself to what it is, figuring out a way to work within it to affect positive change.
That was a great answer, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So I'll just add to this, what I would tell a young midshipman is don't overvalue leadership and think that leadership knows all the answers. I mean, now where I am right now, I'll tell you, we don't know anything. We know some things, but I think we tend to overvalue when we're younger. Oh my gosh, these people know everything and they have all these answers. And what it does is it kind of hampers your ability to solve the problem yourself. I would say 9 times out of 10, the answer really lies in the folks, in that job. Lieutenants have, lieutenant commanders have more power than they allow themselves to have, and more authorities. And I think they hold themselves back because they think leadership knows all the answers. They gotta run it by leadership. And look, in some cases, if you got a congressional brief or something, obviously, you want to run that through. But if these are like ideas where you think you have a good idea, I think sometimes we don't give ourselves the authority that we already have to just change something. And so, my recommendation is own it, change it, ask for forgiveness later, but just go off and do it.
Yeah, as a midshipman, I think that I would have just said live in the moment. stop trying to plan ahead and just be and focus on where you are. And then always remember yourself in this moment. The more senior we get, sometimes it's harder to relate to those that we're leading, but I think that it's really important to know where they're coming from and what they're going through, and to stay relevant and to stay up to date on that. So live in the moment and remember the moment. And then as a qualifying EDO, I would say understand how you see yourself versus how others see you. I think Rebecca hit on this a little bit, knowing and validating how I see myself as a leader. And I think the EDLF, the framework, is a good way to kind of look at this and see this. But looking at guilt, maybe mom guilt, that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother time. But is it validated or isn't it? And how do others see you, and how would they measure you on the same scale? So I think understanding that and then taking that lesson and helping it to influence how you reach out to others and kind of portray yourself to others is important.
So, Admiral, I'm going to revisit this question with you just one more time. Just, I think you have the, the advantage of being able to look back on yourself as a commander and as a captain as well, probably in a little bit more senior leadership position. Is there any advice that you give to maybe some of the more senior officers?
Oh, wow. I think we have, as senior officers, we have really got to take a look at how we were trained and take an honest, self-reflection to see if that's really how we want to train our up-and-coming talent. Is that really the same way? Is that really going to work? And I think we just kind of do it automatically. Oh, I was trained this way, and therefore that must be the right way. And we really have to take a pause, look at the challenges the community is facing, look at the numbers. What are our metrics looking like? Our diversity metrics. What do we have to do things a little bit differently? If the trends really aren't changing over the last 20 years. But if we continue to do the same thing, we're not gonna change the culture. We're not gonna change the numbers. So I would just leave folks with, take a pause and really, be kind of introspective at are the leadership styles we are doing the ones that we need for the community in the next 10 years.
Well, thank you, everyone. We've really enjoyed this conversation today. I've got one last question, and Admiral Okano, it's for you. So we always try and get a good book recommendation from our guests. So do you have any good book recommendations for us?
I actually have a few, probably too many. So I will leave you with, man, how many can I give you, Matt? I will start with, here's how I would categorize them. If you want something relevant and you want something that really kind of, I think, frames the problem of where we are right now in acquisition, but just in general, I would say The Kill Chain by Christian Brose is a really good book and probably a must read. Got to read The Kill Chain. That came out this year. Christian Brose was I think the chief of staff for John McCain when he was a senator, and it is just very, very well written and very well framed, just in general. If you want some books on how to change culture and how to kind of adapt to kind of a new environment, I would say The Culture Code by Daniel Cooley, Range by David Epstein, Loonshots by Safi Bahcall. Really, all those books I think are really, really good at identifying that sometimes in your organization you got to be multidextrous, right? You got to have your process enforcers, but you also have to have your artists, and you got to have the folks that actually innovate something, and they have to be allowed to fail. And those two are kind of at opposite spectrums, but both have to coexist. And creating those cultures where both can thrive is just so important. And then just being a good leader in general. I would say Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, just on race and all the issues we've got there. The War for Kindness by Jamil Zaki is a really good book on empathy, as Rebecca was saying. And the empathy deficit we have just as a nation in general, and how we can't communicate. We're so polarized on so many issues, and really kind of making ourselves able to hear the other side without getting so invested in hating them first. So I would start with those. I'm an avid reader. I have endless recommendations for you.
Well, thank you for those, ma'am. I appreciate it. Hey, I have really enjoyed this conversation. It's been a great time spent with everybody. Unfortunately, it has to come to an end. But again, I appreciate everybody's time here, and we hope to have all of you guys back soon here on The Wardroom. Thank you for joining us in The Wardroom. Special thanks to our sound engineer, Lieutenant Andrew Rowley. If you have questions you would like our guests to answer, comments, or suggestions, you can email us at thewardroompodcast@gmail.com or tweet or follow us on Twitter @wardroompodcast. Join us next time for a conversation with Captain Brian Durant on the leadership lessons he's learned working Operation Warp Speed over the last year. We look forward to meeting again in The Wardroom.